action! Hi everybody, it's me, JBR, coming at you with another Theater Thursday! Yay! As you know, every Thursday I do a movie review. This time I'm going to be doing the Disney movie Enchanted with Amy Adams and Patrick Dempsey. If you have not seen this movie, if you don't know anything about it or whatever, take this as your spoiler alert. Absorb it in. Take it in there. Alright? Okay? Alright? Okay, we're gonna get into this. Alright. The movie Enchanted from Walt Disney, it's your typical Disney princess movie, like as if you were watching any other Disney princess movie, but it's got a little bit of a twist. Okay, you start off Enchanted with the opening of a book, which is kind of like a nod to the older movies like Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty or one of those movies. And you start with the opening of the book and you hear the story of how there's this evil queen named Nerissa who is evil and cruel and mean, and she, all she cares about is like staying in control, like staying queen. And she has her stepson, the prince, which is his name is Edward, and they rule the kingdom together. Obviously she's the queen, so she's more the boss of him, but like she tries to distract him by giving him stuff to do, like fighting ogres and giants and things, because she's afraid that if he were to one day meet a woman and fall in love, then obviously that woman that he falls in love with will become the queen, and then obviously she won't be anymore, and so they'll rule the kingdom instead of her being in charge. And obviously that worries her because she wants to stay queen. So she has him be distracted by the monsters and things like that. But deep, deep in the forest, there is this one woman. Her name is Giselle. She is our leading lady, our princess. She's that typical Disney princess, all she cares about is falling in love and the typical happily ever after. She, in a way is raised to, or is written in that way of all she expects is the happily ever after, and that's it. That's how it ends. Typical story. But she doesn't most Disney princesses would think. You don't think about after that. She only cares about, she only thinks about that happily ever after and stuff like that. But then one day she had a dream and she woke up and she was telling all her forest friends, oh, I dreamt of my prince, and so she builds a model of what the guy looked like with her animal friends, and one of her animal friends is named Pip. He's a chipmunk. He's a talking chipmunk, and he's sassy, and he'll tell you what's what, and he's kind of he protects Giselle, in a way that you wouldn't expect a chipmunk to do, but that's what he does. But one day, Edward is fighting a ogre/giant type of monster, and then he hears Giselle singing, and then he goes to chase after her, and the ogre goes to chase after her too, and then Edward defeats him, and then he saves Giselle, and then they fall in love, that typical love at first sight type of thing, and he's like, oh, we should be married in the morning, and then they ride off into the sunset, and then the next day they obviously are getting married. She's in her big poofy ball gown, and she's walking up to the castle, and to keep her from getting married to the prince, the queen, she transforms herself into an old hag. Now, why does that sound familiar? See, the best thing about Enchanted is that they nod towards older Disney movies, specifically princess movies. The main three I notice is Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, and Snow White. Obviously, the old hag, that nods towards the Snow White because the stepmother turned herself old to trick her to think she's a different person. So she brings Giselle to this well and says, oh, it's good luck for your wedding day, and blah, 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 blah. And then she's saying, and they all lived happily ever after in her head, and then she pushes her, and she falls into the well, and she goes. And then, obviously, instead of what you would expect of falling into a well, magic and, all these sparkles and all these things happen. And she falls, and then she, opens a door, a hatch, if you say, and then we enter our Amy Adams. She, it goes from cartoon style to obviously our live action, like our lives, and she ends up in the streets of New York City. And she's still in the big poofy ball gown, and obviously she doesn't fit in with everybody else. She's like, why is everything so different? Why is everybody so, like, unhappy and angry and mean? Obviously she doesn't know, because she lived in her fantasy world. These emotions are foreign to her. But then eventually, when she's trying to get help to get back to her Prince Edward, she meets this lawyer and his daughter, and the lawyer's name is Robert. He's like a divorce lawyer, so he like helps people when they're going through a divorce and all that type of stuff. And so she has no place to stay, so Robert lets her stay at his apartment with them until Edward comes, or until she can find other arrangements. And they kind of take her in, and they see obviously that she's weird, because she makes clothing out of curtains and rugs and all different types of things. And she talks to animals. Obviously animals don't talk in the real world, but where she's from they do. So they just think she's delusional. They think she's nuts. But she's not. She's just going through what she's used to. So she tries to, like, while she stays there, she tries to, like, understand the world around her. And, like, she tries to help Robert, like, see the happiness in things. Like, she tries to wonder why he doesn't, like, get giddy about love, or why he doesn't like singing and dancing. That's just practical for him. So she tries to teach him the way of, like, believing in that type of fairy tale happily ever after, as of, Robert also teaching her, it's not all a fairy tale. It's not all easy, and life doesn't go always the way you want it. And so they kind of balance each other out in that type of way. So he's, like, showing her the streets of New York, and she's kind of saying, oh, it doesn't have to be all negative and so, like, proper and political and everything. And then she sings about how he could treat his fiance. He has a fiance. Her name is Nancy. She tells Robert how to treat Nancy, and he's like, oh, I just don't like saying I love you every freaking 5 minutes, And then she sings about how she should be treated, and then she sends her Giselle makes like a rose or flower wreath, and then she takes doves, and then she sends it off to Nancy, and then she like gives them, and then Robert invites Nancy to like this ball that the town is having, and it's called the King and Queen's Waltz Dance or whatever. And then so they all decide to go, but then Edward, obviously he's been searching for her through the city, because he went into the well too to find her, and then so he's been searching through the city, and then they finally find each other, and then obviously Edward, being the prince that he is, he thinks that Robert's been holding her captive, but obviously he's not. He's been very nice. And then so she and so Giselle and Edward, they go on a date for the first time. Obviously you don't usually see Disney princesses going on dates, but this is the first time. Good job, Disney. Okay, moving on. So they go on their first date, and then Edward's kind of pushing. He's like, oh, I really want to go back to Anastasia. That's the place that they're from. He's like, oh, when are we going to go back? I really want to go back to be married and have her happily ever after. But she's like, okay, I'll make a deal with you. Let's go to that King and Queen's dance, and then we'll leave. And then he agrees, and then so all of them meet at the dance. So Robert and Nancy are dancing together, and it's kind of like Victorian, the dressing, like everybody's in big dresses and suits and things and wigs. And then Giselle like has gone shopping with Morgan, his Robert's daughter, and then they got a dress and her hair done, and then they all meet at the dance, and obviously Robert is like gobsmacked of how good she looks and stuff, and then she's like, I thought you couldn't dance, because he told her that he didn't like to dance. He's like, I didn't say I couldn't. I said I didn't like to. That doesn't mean I can't. And then so then the dance announcer, he says, okay, everybody, it's time to have every guy has to dance with somebody he didn't invite to the ball to dance the King and Queen's Waltz. And then so Nancy and Edward go dance together, and then obviously Robert and Giselle are left, and then so they dance together, and then and then obviously it's a beautiful song. I don't know the name of the song, but it's a beautiful song that they play for their dance, and they're not dancing like everybody else is kind of dancing like strict, like that typical this dance, it's very strict. They kind of like, they're very fluid and like they move in a way that everybody else is, and I obviously think they did that on purpose, and then he's like spinning her around, and he's like dipping her, and he's like showing how special, in a way, he's like showing how special he's been holding back in a way, and like he sings to her in her ear, the song that's playing, like he sings it in her ear, and I love that moment so much because it really like clicks it for the movie. I think it really shows their like connection for one another. And obviously, it's kind of sad because she has fallen in love with him, but she realizes because he's with Nancy, she can't have him, or, in a way, whatever. But then after they dance together, Edward and Giselle are about to leave. Edward goes to get Giselle's wrap, and then the old woman comes back, and then she gives her an apple. And then she's like, oh, take one bite, dearie. Obviously nodding to Snow White again. And all these memories, all the people you met will go away. Like, she's kind of, obviously she's lying to her to get her to eat the poison apple. She tells her that the apple will, like, wipe her memory and none of this will ever happen. Obviously, Giselle buys into it. She bites it and she passes out. She doesn't, like, go into that death, sleep, whatever it is automatically. I mean, she bites in, she passes out. And then the old woman is she goes into the elevator to take her outside, and then she does a spell and she turns into the evil queen again, and then Edward holds the door open. He's like, Mother? And she's like, Edward! And she's like, oh, her, yeah, she must have swooned, obviously lying her ass off. And then they take a bed, and then they lay Giselle down there, and then she's like, oh, what can we do for her? And then everybody's saying that she's going to die, that she's done for. And then Robert says true love's kiss. Obviously, it's the most powerful thing in the world. And then Edward goes to kiss her, and then obviously nothing happens. And then he tries again, nothing happens. And he keeps trying to do it, and she's not waking up. So what's the problem? You would think, oh, her true love did come to her, but it's not Edward. So he says, so Edward says, unless, and then he turns to Robert, and he's like, no, it couldn't be me. I've only known her a couple days. And then Nancy says, kiss her, Robert, it's okay. And then he says to Giselle, obviously when she's passed out, don't leave me. And then he kisses her, and then it takes a second, and then you hear the clock strike 12. And she was supposed to die if they didn't wake her up by then. And she does wake up, and then she says, I knew it was you. And then they kiss and they hug, and obviously Nancy gets upset because she realizes that, Robert loves her, I guess, more or whatever. So, obviously, the queen gets upset, and she's like, the most powerful thing in the world. You want a show? I'll give you a show. And then she takes Edward's sword, and then she does a spell, and she slams the sword on the ground. And then she turns into a dragon, nodding to Sleeping Beauty, obviously. And then she says, oh, all this, true love's kiss stuff really brings the evil out of me. And then, she's like, oh, if I'm going to remain queen, I'm going to need a story for when I come back. And she's like, what if a giant monster showed up and killed everyone? And then Robert's protecting Giselle because she was gonna go for Giselle first, and he's like, over my dead body. And then she takes Robert, and then she heads out the window, and then obviously Giselle goes after her, and then she takes Edward's sword and she runs out to the building. And obviously when she's running, she loses her shoe, nodding to Cinderella. And that's why I say there's the three main nods to the three first movies ever made from the princess movies ever made from Disney. And so she runs up to the top of the building. I don't think it's the Empire State, but it's a very tall building. And so she's holding Robert, and then she's like roaring as the dragon, and then she's like, "Oh, Nerissa, I won't let you take him." And then she like goes to fight her with the sword, and then Pip shows up, to help. And then he says he needs to lay off the nuts because he's overweight, so he like steps on her hand when she's holding onto the top of the building, and so obviously because of the extra weight, it like bends and she falls. And then she drops Robert, and then Giselle throws the sword, and then it catches him in the sleeve, and then it catches onto the building, so he's stuck like that. And then Nerissa falls, and then she falls into the sewer, and then it's like kind of splats. So I don't know if she technically dies, but it's like, whatever you want to take your opinion if you watch this movie. But moving on. So she, they are on top of the building, and she says to him, "Oh, is this a habit of yours, falling off of stuff?" Because he said that to the, very early in the film, because she fell, and he's like, "Oh, is this a habit of yours, falling off of stuff?" And she says, "Well, normally someone's around to catch me." So she says to him, "Is this an act of yours, falling off of stuff?" And he says, "Only when you're around to catch me." And then they kiss, and then obviously the movie zooms out, and then you go back to the book, so it passes over. And then Nancy's sitting on the ballroom with the shoe. She's like, she lost her shoe. Figures. And then Edward says, "May I?" And then he puts on the shoe, and then he says it's a perfect fit. So they end up together, weird enough. And then they go back to Anastasia, so they go through the sewer grate, and then you see them getting married in the Annihilation cartoon style. And then they, her phone rings, but she throws it away, and all the animals are like, ooh, because they don't know what technology is down there, or there, wherever it is. So it's really cool. And then you go back to the real world, and Giselle opened a company called Andalasia Fashions, where, Nancy used to be. And then because she's, obviously I said, she has a knack for making fashion out of weird fabric. So she made a fabric company called Andalasia Fashion. It's for little girls and dresses and things like that. And then Robert and her ended up together. And then obviously you hear the voiceover, and of course they all lived happily ever after. And then, you get roll credits. It's a beautiful film. It's put in a way that's obviously not a lot of Disney princesses are used to. Obviously it's put in a real aspect. It's put in a real perspective, you know what I'm saying? If I have to rate the movie 1 out of 5, I'll give it a 5. It's awesome. I recommend it for you, your kids, if you like Disney princess films, whatever. But that wraps up this video. If you have any suggestions, write down in the comments, like and subscribe, and I'll see